Well, here in southern Alberta, agriculture is the order of the day and naturally impacts every family in the region. Dairy farming is lesser known and talked about than some more visible ag sectors, but we wanted to check in with a local dairy farmer who's also the chair of Alberta Milk, Stuart Bovey. Thanks so much for joining us today from Barnwell, Alberta, all the way out in Barnwell.
Good morning.
Great to have you on. Okay, so Stuart, we hear a lot about ranching and feedlots around here, of course. So in your mind, what sets dairy farms apart from cattle operations?
Well, generally a different breed, first of all. It tends to be Holstein. There is also Jerseys and other breeds in southern Alberta, but it tends to be Holstein. So that would be one thing. The other one is, there are lesser numbers, I would say. There's about 150 dairies in southern Alberta, 490 in all of Alberta. So that, like you say, a little bit lesser on public perception-wise, I suppose. But I guess that would, and we're definitely a different industry as far as genetics and livestock.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so would you say that there's a need for more dairy farms in Canada?
Not more dairy farms, I would say. No. Production is, before COVID was always going up. The last 2 years it's leveled off, just because of consumer demand and consumer issues. So right now, milk production in Canada is basically, it's growing at about 1 to 2% per year. That's what it averages.
Wow. Okay. So at the very basics, what does Alberta Milk do and who does it serve?
So Alberta Milk is a producer driven industry. So I've been a producer my entire life. I've been in this current location for 27 years. So the board of directors is made up of all producers. You have to be a producer to be on the board. Alberta Milk, what it does, it does many things. One of it is it's actually it coordinates milk receiving, milk quality, transporting milk to producers, raw milk to processors, I should say. Takes care of on-farm animal care. It does many, many things, but all, it's a producer-run organization.
Wow. Okay. So the dairy farming in southern Alberta, would you say that it's more of a multi-generational family business, or are they owned by large corporations? What are we looking at here?
It very much tends to be multi-generational, stay in the family type business. That's certainly my roots. My father started in the 1960s in BC. That's very, very typical. Some of the farms, I know there's one west of Lethbridge, has been over 100 years in business. It really tends to stay in the family just because it really affects your life, I guess is what I would say. It's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you're not born into it, you'd probably look and go, why would I want a dairy farm? But if you're born into it, it has a different draw to you, I guess, is what it is. And then, of course, in southern Alberta, we also have the Hutterites that quite a few of them have dairies as well, which is obviously multi-generational and doesn't move, obviously. So
definitely. So are you then moving your milk into other organizations that maybe then produce cheese, or is that all one and the same of the dairy industry?
So currently in Western Canada, we don't have a large cooperative. So what Alberta Milk does is coordinates milk transport to processors. So in Canada, there's 3 major processors, and then there's a myriad of smaller ones and some on-farm processing and other things. But the 3 major ones take about 75 to 80% of the milk produced in Canada, and that's also in Alberta. Currently in Alberta, we're a little bit short of processing. So sometimes some of our milk goes east or west, depending on the day and the week. And we coordinate with other milk boards in Western Canada to take that milk. That's obviously, we work very well with our other Western milk boards, and we work nationally as well. But certainly on milk processing, we work as a Western group, the 4 Western provinces. So what we do is about a month to 2, hopefully a month in advance, we have all the loads of milk destined for their processor. There's processor orders, and then we fill them. So that's how dairying works. So As producers, we do not process our own milk. We sell it to processors.
Okay, there you go. You answered my question. I was always kind of curious about that. Now, in this industry, you hear of something called the quota system. So maybe explain why this is important to dairy farming families and Canadian consumers, and maybe also how the quota system works.
So it's fascinating that how you asked the question. Actually, dairying around the world is on a quota system. Actually, if you really get down to it, here the reason it gets named differently in Canada is it was put in place in the 1960s, and it's actually run by the CDC, the Canadian Dairy Commission. So it's actually federal, and that's what differentiates us from other countries in the world. Most dairy systems, I would say, in the world now are run by the processor. That the processor wants so much milk, and they contract, which is the same as quota. It's just a different name. But anyways, going back to Canada, quota is just a producer can buy from another producer a market share is what it is. So that's actually the whole name. It's market share quota. And what you do is say like my own farm, I have a quota that's basically through Alberta Milk, and I have a certain deliverable amount of milk that I'm allowed to produce in a day. And that's transferred farmer to farmer. And that's what they call the quota. Now, what Alberta Milk does is if I would want to sell my quota, I would put it on the market and another producer could buy it. The only thing fascinating about quota is that the provincial boards actually control it. So if the market gets bigger, like I mentioned to you before, if it gets 2% bigger, then there's 2% more quota that can go into the system. That is not sold. That's distributed amongst producers, or we start new producers. So that's how that all works, and that's all mandated to the provincial boards, and that's one of the things that the provincial board does do.
Wow.
Is we have a general manager and staff that deal with producer issues on that level. But that's all mandated through federal legislation, and that's why sometimes we're targeted because it's a federal thing, and there's long-standing agreements, interprovincially and things like that.
Lots of red tape, I'm sure.
Yeah. Which we're very much working on, trying to eliminate some of the red tape, just because it becomes onerous. So
a little bit cumbersome, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But it's fascinating that in other jurisdictions and other countries, it's very similar. It just doesn't have it doesn't have the same reputation for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, but anyway.
Interesting. Okay, well, you mentioned other countries. So there has been talk of countries like the US and New Zealand wanting to get their products into our markets. But is this a good idea for Canadians?
Well, COVID taught us a few things. One is supply chains. So the downside with milk is if you want to move it long distances, it becomes really tough to do because milk is a perishable product. So it becomes very, very tricky to move milk long distances. That's why in Canada, milk is produced in all 10 provinces, just because it seems like a great idea when things are going well, but when you get a supply chain problem, which COVID did, and other things can bring it on, weather, anything. So bringing from other countries, while it seems like a good idea, is much more difficult than it actually seems.
Yeah, I can't imagine any benefit to having dairy products come in from New Zealand or someplace else when they can be produced right here at home.
For sure. And what it is we've mentioned a little bit about the Canadian Dairy Commission. It gets targeted because we have pricing set nationally, and the U.S. targets that because our return comes only from the marketplace. So I only make money from what the consumers pay. Other jurisdictions tend to have all sorts of programs which are not from the price of milk, but they have other programs that get money into the hands of producers, and that's where it gets murky and it gets tricky, and why you get trade deals and trade negotiations that while we can produce milk cheaper, where are you making your money? Is based. because when you get into the details, then it gets very complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I mean, we've heard too that U.S. lobbyists are proposing that Canadians would pay less for their dairy products. But is that just their way to lobby to open up a new market?
Absolutely. It's absolutely what it is. Because what happens is, and we've just seen it even in COVID, I mean, I'm sure you're aware in the Fraser Valley, also they were shorted with milk just because the farms were flooded and and then there was COVID issues on trying to haul milk interprovincially. Well, they tried to get milk out of the US. It was 50% higher than the Canadian price.
Okay.
So it's just fascinating that they want to open the market up, and then once you've eliminated Canadian dairies, your milk price would be actually much higher.
Oh, wow. I'm just curious too, how different is the U.S. dairy product to what's produced in Canada? Is there a difference?
Well, they have some different rules that they adhere to. Something on quality, they are allowed to have somewhat poorer quality. I wouldn't say it is poor, but they're allowed to. So there's that difference. Our regulations are much tighter, which I'm very much in favor of. Even as a producer, I think we need to make sure that our quality is of the highest standard rather than even medium. I want to use the right word. I wouldn't not high quality, I guess.
Of course. So what makes the Canadian product more high quality then?
We have regulations as far as bacteria levels and stuff like that in the raw milk that are more strict than other jurisdictions. Okay. Even though I would say the majority of the milk is nowhere near limits, like the high limit, it's still allowed. So that's one difference. The other one is they are allowed to use growth hormone in the U.S. that we're not allowed to use in Canada. So that's an animal that's been restricted for probably 20 years already, and at least 20, close to 25, I guess, in Canada. It is illegal to use in Canada. So we're not allowed to use it on our dairy animals. So that's another difference.
And when it comes to feed for your dairy cattle, how much of an impact does the type of feed have on maybe taste of the product? I know with eggs, like in the US, you'll see the yolks are more yellow than in Canada. They're almost an orangey color, and it's because they're corn-fed compared to wheat-fed. Is there anything similar with cattle and with milk, with dairy
well,
cows?
It certainly can be affected. I know, like I said, I have a long history in that. In the dairy industry, I know my parents, they would feed, waste like cauliflower or things like that, and you will taste that right away. But now, because of just the size of farms, we tend to grow our own feed, or certainly some of it. So most cows are fed a pretty similar ration, I would say, as far as, in southern Alberta, I feed a falfa. In, say, British Columbia, where I'm originally from, they feed grass just because of the climate. But then most cows, most dairy animals in Canada, I would say, get silage, corn as well. So that really makes the milk taste pretty much the same.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, and again, back to our processing end, obviously we have to work with our industry stakeholders, with our processors. And of course, they like the same across Canada if they could get it, right? So I would say you would have to be a pretty picky dairy eater to notice the difference on milk taste across Canada. I'm not saying that, maybe there's places in the world that it would taste different, but I'd say in Canada, it pretty much tastes the same.
Okay. So the feds right now are proposing fertilizer restrictions. Would this affect dairy farming at all?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
And how?
Yeah. This might be a long answer, so but
brace myself.
Brace yourself, yeah. It's really handy to go after fertilizer, and they're actually going after fertilizer emissions, which are not even measured, right? And say, well, we're going to cut fertilizer use by 30%. Well, as a farmer, that's a unique challenge, but I'll tell you right now, that will increase prices. The reason fertilizer gets used is it's an efficient way to grow more feed per acre. That's what it is. So if you say you want to use less, that's fine. But then the cost per acre goes up, which translates right into a higher cost of milk in my industry.
Okay, and then the consumer will probably feel that in the end.
For sure.
Oh, when inflation is hitting us all too.
Well, and the problem with And I understand. I've personally had meetings with the federal environment minister, who is certainly very much in favor of restricting fertilizer use or whatever. But the problem is that they go by world numbers and by about emissions, which is a dangerous game to play. Because I would agree that we should limit fertilizer emissions. Doesn't mean you have to limit fertilizer use. You just got to make sure it all gets used properly, which is easy to say and a little bit more difficult to do. While you need farmers involved is really what I mean. That's what I do. That's my whole career, is trying to make, okay, you want us to use less fertilizer and emit less, we'll figure out a way to do it. Don't worry, because fertilizer is expensive.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for that insight. Really appreciate it. It looks like we are about out of time, but we really appreciated having you on today, Stuart.
Anytime.
Absolutely. That was Stuart Boovy, the chair of Alberta Milk. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.